At 23:45 on October 19, 1942, Lieutenant Robert Lynch crouched behind the wheel of PT-48, watching three Japanese Daihatsu barges cut through the black water off Cape Esperance. 26 years old, 14 night patrols, 0 confirmed kills. The barges were moving 60 troops and ammunition to reinforce Guadalcanal. Each barge carried a Type 92 heavy machine gun and steel plate armor thick enough to stop rifle rounds. Lynch had 4 Mark 8 torpedoes mounted on PT-48. Each torpedo weighed over 2,000 pounds and carried a 466-pound TNT warhead. The minimum depth setting was 10 feet. The Japanese barges drew 5 feet of water. His torpedoes would pass directly underneath them. By mid-October 1942, Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 had lost 6 boats in the waters around Guadalcanal. 17 sailors had died. The pattern was simple. PT boats detected Japanese barge convoys. PT boats attempted torpedo runs. The torpedoes missed. The barges returned fire. PT boats withdrew or burned. The twin 50 caliber Browning machine guns mounted on PT-48 could fire 850 rounds per minute. Against wooden fishing boats, devastating. Against armored Daihatsu barges, ineffective. The 50 caliber rounds sparked off the steel plate and did nothing. Japanese forces were running supply missions down the slot every night. The Americans called it the Tokyo Express. Destroyers and fast cruisers brought troops, ammunition, and food under cover of darkness. When American aircraft made destroyer runs too dangerous, the Japanese switched to barges. Slower, smaller, harder to detect, immune to PT boat torpedoes. Squadron commanders at Tulagi were desperate for solutions. Some crews mounted single-shot Army M3 37mm anti-tank guns on their bows. The crews removed the wheels. They lashed the guns to timber planks. One shot. Manual reload. Better than nothing. PT-109, commanded by Lieutenant John Kennedy, mounted an M3 anti-tank gun the night before a patrol in August. The gun worked. Sort of. Kennedy's crew could fire 1 round. Then they had to reload manually while Japanese machine guns raked the boat. Not sustainable. The real problem was mathematics. A Daihatsu barge could carry 60 fully armed troops, or 8 tons of supplies. The Japanese were running 20 to 30 barges per night past Guadalcanal. PT boats had to sink multiple barges per patrol to disrupt supply lines. Single-shot guns could not do that. Henderson Field sat 3 miles inland from Lunga Point. Marines had captured the airfield on August 7th. By October, the field was a graveyard. Wrecked aircraft lined the runway apron. Japanese bombing raids hit Henderson almost daily. Betty bombers, 0 fighters. The Americans scrambled everything they could fly. P-400 Airacobras, F-4F Wildcats. Damaged aircraft crashed on landing. Some burned. Some simply died. Dozens of Bell P-39 Airacobra fighters sat in pieces around Henderson Field. The Airacobra was a strange aircraft. The engine sat behind the pilot. The propeller shaft ran under the cockpit. This unusual design created space in the nose for something remarkable. A 37mm Oldsmobile M4 automatic cannon firing through the propeller hub. The M4 cannon could fire 150 rounds per minute, 30 rounds per horseshoe-shaped magazine. Muzzle velocity of 2,000 feet per second. The cannon was designed to destroy light armor and aircraft, high explosive rounds, armor-piercing rounds, devastating firepower. If you want to see how Lynch and his crew solved the barge problem, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from World War II. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Lynch. Most P-39 wrecks at Henderson were total losses. Engines seized, wings sheared off, fuselages broken, but the cannons were intact. Hydraulic recoil systems, feed mechanisms, barrel assemblies, everything needed to make them work. On October 20th, Lynch walked Henderson Field at dawn. He counted 23 wrecked Airacobras. Some had been there for weeks. Mechanics had already stripped useful parts. Instruments, radios, control cables. Nobody had touched the cannons. They were aircraft weapons. No mounting points on PT boats. No doctrine for installation. No official approval. Lynch stood next to a P-39 with its nose buried in coral. The 37mm cannon protruded from the propeller hub like a steel finger. He did the math. 150 rounds per minute, 30-round magazine, automatic fire. He looked back toward the water where PT-48 waited at dock. 3 mechanics from his crew were watching him. They knew what he was thinking. At 1400 hours that afternoon, Lynch approached Commander Alan Calvert, commanding officer of Squadron 3. There were no forms for this, no procurement system, no official channels, just a simple question and a desperate need. By 1630, 4 PT boat crews were walking Henderson Field with cutting torches and wrenches. They had until nightfall. The Oldsmobile M4 cannon weighed 213 pounds without ammunition. The hydraulic recoil system added another 40 pounds. The feed mechanism another 30. Total weight of a complete gun assembly from a P-39 Airacobra, approximately 280 pounds. PT-48 was an Elco 80-foot boat with a wooden hull, constructed from 2 layers of 1-inch mahogany planking. The deck was 3/4-inch plywood over oak frames spaced on 2-foot centers. Navy engineers had calculated maximum deck loading for 50-caliber machine gun turrets. Nobody had calculated loading for a 280-pound automatic cannon firing 150 rounds per minute. Technical Sergeant James Coogan had maintained P-39 aircraft at Selfridge Field in Michigan before the war. October 1942 found him assigned to Henderson Field as an aircraft armorer. He knew every bolt and hydraulic line in an Airacobra cannon assembly. When Lynch's crew arrived at Henderson Field that afternoon, Coogan was the first man they found. The first P-39 they approached had taken a 20mm cannon round through the cockpit 3 weeks earlier. The pilot had died on impact. Nobody had moved the wreck. Coogan crawled into the nose section with a wrench set and a cutting torch. The M4 cannon was mounted to the aircraft's engine reduction gear housing with 8 high-tensile steel bolts. Each bolt required a 15/16-inch socket. Coogan had a 3/4-inch socket, close enough in wartime. Removing the cannon required disconnecting the hydraulic recoil lines, the charging cable, the ammunition feed chute, and the firing solenoid wiring, then cutting through the engine mount. The work took 2 hours per aircraft. They had 6 hours of daylight remaining. Lynch detailed 8 men to the job, 2 men per wreck, 4 cannons by nightfall if everything went perfectly. Nothing went perfectly. The second P-39 had been sitting in tropical heat for 11 days. Hydraulic fluid had congealed in the recoil system. The charging cable had corroded. When Coogan's team tried to remove the cannon, the mounting bolts had seized from heat expansion. They needed penetrating oil. Henderson Field had no penetrating oil. They used aviation gasoline and waited 20 minutes. The bolts came loose. Barely. By 1730 hours, they had removed 3 complete M4 cannon assemblies from wrecked Airacobras. Each cannon lay on the coral beside Henderson Field's runway apron. Coogan inspected the mechanisms. The first cannon's hydraulic recoil cylinder showed a hairline crack. Unusable. The second cannon's feed mechanism had a bent pawl, repairable with a file and 30 minutes. The third cannon was pristine. PT boats had no mounting points designed for aircraft cannons. The bow deck forward of the chart house was flat plywood over oak stringers. Lynch needed a pedestal mount that could absorb recoil forces, allow 360-degree rotation, and survive the flex of a planing hull hitting waves at 40 knots. Henderson Field's machine shop consisted of 1 lathe, 1 drill press, and a welding rig powered by a diesel generator. The shop had built engine mounts for damaged aircraft, repaired propeller hubs, fabricated brackets for radios and gun cameras. Now they needed to build a naval gun mount. Chief Machinist's mate Donald Frey designed the mount in 40 minutes using a grease pencil on a sheet of aluminum. The design was simple because it had to be. A steel base plate 12 inches in diameter, 4 bolt holes matching PT-48's deck framing, a vertical pipe section welded to the base, a rotating collar with bearing surfaces, a yoke to hold the cannon. All constructed from scrap steel salvaged from destroyed aircraft landing gear. Frey's team started welding at 18:15 hours. The generator powering the arc welder kept cutting out because Henderson Field was rationing diesel fuel. They welded in 5-minute intervals, let the generator cool, welded again. The base plate took 40 minutes. The pipe section took 30. The rotating collar took an hour because the bearing surfaces had to be machined smooth or the gun would bind. By 2100 hours, they had a crude pedestal mount. It looked like something built in a high school shop class. Welds were ugly. The paint was scorched. The rotating collar had 3 degrees of wobble, but it would hold a 280-pound cannon and it would rotate. Probably. They loaded the cannon and mount onto a 6x6 truck. 3 sailors rode in the back, holding the cannon to prevent it from bouncing on the rough road down to the dock. PT-48 waited at Tulagi across Iron Bottom Sound. The truck reached the dock at Lunga Point at 22:30 hours. A Higgins boat ferried the equipment across the water. Lynch was waiting on PT-48 when the cannon arrived. His crew had already measured the bow deck and marked 4 mounting points. The deck frames underneath were doubled oak, strong enough for a .50 caliber turret, maybe strong enough for this. They would know when they fired the first shot, or when the mount ripped through the deck. Installing the base plate required drilling 4 holes through 3/4-inch plywood and 2 inches of oak framing. They had a hand crank drill. It took 30 minutes per hole, 2 hours total. By 01:15 on October 21st, the base plate was bolted down. They lifted the cannon onto the mount. The collar fit. The yoke held. The cannon elevated and depressed. It rotated. Not smoothly, but it moved. Ammunition was a problem nobody had solved yet. The M4 cannon used a horseshoe-shaped magazine holding 30 rounds. The magazines were stored in the P-39's ammunition bay behind the cockpit. Each magazine weighed 40 pounds when loaded. PT-48 had no ammunition bay, no magazine storage, no quick reload system. They stacked 6 loaded magazines on the deck beside the gun mount. In combat, a loader would hand-feed magazines while the gunner fired. Crude, but functional. Maybe. At 0200 hours on October 21st, 1942, PT-48 had the first aircraft automatic cannon ever mounted on a United States Navy patrol torpedo boat. It had taken 9 hours from Henderson Field salvage to installation. The gun had not been test-fired. The mount had not been stress-tested. The crew had no training on the weapon. None of that mattered. Japanese barges were running supplies that night. PT-48 departed Tulagi at 2200 hours on October 21st. Squadron 3 sent 4 boats on patrol that night. PT-40, PT-46, PT-48, and PT-60. Standard formation. 2 boats north of Savo Island, 2 boats patrolling the waters off Cape Esperance. Lynch commanded PT-48 with the untested 37mm cannon mounted on his bow. Gunner's mate 2nd Class Harold Mitchell volunteered to operate the cannon. Mitchell had fired .50 caliber Browning machine guns on 12 combat patrols. He had never fired an aircraft automatic cannon. Nobody on PT-48 had. Coogan had provided basic instructions at the dock. Point, press trigger, change magazines when empty. The hydraulic recoil system would absorb most of the shock. Probably. The night was overcast. No moon. Visibility approximately 200 yards in ambient starlight. Sea state, calm. PT-48 ran on 2 engines at 15 knots to reduce noise and wake signature. The 37mm cannon on the bow pointed forward. Mitchell sat behind it on an ammunition box with 6 loaded magazines stacked within reach. At 23:55 hours, PT-48's radar operator detected surface contacts bearing 320 degrees at 4,000 yards. 4 contacts. Speed approximately 8 knots. Lynch altered course to intercept. The contacts were consistent with Daihatsu barges running supplies down the slot. American doctrine for PT boat attacks required closing to 1,000 yards before launching torpedoes. Optimum torpedo range was 800 yards. Closer increased hit probability, but exposed the PT boat to return fire. Against barges with torpedoes that could not hit them, the doctrine was worthless. Lynch needed to get close enough for Mitchell to fire the cannon effectively. At 3,000 yards, Lynch could see the barges silhouetted against the darker water. 4 Type A Daihatsu barges in line formation. Each barge was 49 feet long with a 14-foot beam, powered by a single diesel engine. Maximum speed, 12 knots. Each barge carried a Type 92 heavy machine gun mounted amidships. The barges were transporting troops. Lynch could see the shapes of men sitting on the deck. PT-48 closed to 1,500 yards. Mitchell charged the 37mm cannon using the manual charging handle. The mechanism worked. The first round seated in the chamber. He flipped the safety off. The cannon was ready to fire. Nobody knew what would happen next. At 1,000 yards, the lead Japanese barge detected PT-48. The Type 92 machine gun opened fire. 7.7mm rounds stitched the water 30 yards short of the PT boat. The gun's tracer rounds drew orange lines across the black water. Lynch maintained course. He was committed now. Mitchell opened fire at 800 yards. The 37mm cannon roared. The muzzle flash lit the entire bow deck white. The recoil drove the gun backward in its mount. The deck flexed. The pedestal mount held. The cannon fired. Mitchell kept his finger on the trigger. The M4 cycled at 150 rounds per minute, 2.5 rounds per second. The horseshoe magazine held 30 rounds. Mitchell emptied the magazine in 12 seconds. The high explosive rounds hit the lead barge along its waterline. Each round exploded on impact. The first 3 rounds punched through the steel plate armor like it was cardboard. The 4th round detonated inside the troop compartment. The barge's diesel fuel tank ignited. Orange flame erupted from the center of the barge. Men jumped into the water. The barge continued forward for another 50 yards, burning. Then it settled by the bow and stopped. Mitchell yanked the empty magazine off the cannon. The horseshoe feed system came away clean. He grabbed the second magazine and slammed it onto the feed mechanism. The loading process took 8 seconds. Too long. In combat, 8 seconds was an eternity. But it worked. The second barge in the Japanese formation turned hard to port, attempting to break away. PT-48's helmsman followed. Lynch closed to 600 yards. Mitchell fired the second magazine, 30 rounds in 12 seconds. 22 rounds hit the barge. The barge's armor stopped the first 5 rounds. The 6th round penetrated. The 7th found something volatile. The barge exploded. Not burned, exploded. The blast was visible for miles. Ammunition cook-off. The barge disintegrated. The 3rd and 4th barges scattered. One turned north toward Savo Island. One turned south toward Guadalcanal. PT-48 pursued the southern barge. Mitchell loaded his 3rd magazine. The mount's rotating collar was binding from heat expansion. He had to muscle the gun to track the target. The bearing surfaces that Frey had machined were already wearing under combat stress. At 700 yards, Mitchell fired the 3rd magazine. The barge returned fire with its Type 92 machine gun. 7.7mm rounds hit PT-48's bow. One round punched through the plywood deck, 18 inches from Mitchell's position. He did not stop firing. The 37mm rounds walked up the barge from stern to bow. The barge's engine died. The barge lost way and drifted. Men were abandoning into the water. The barge did not sink, but it was no longer combat effective. PT-48 broke off the attack at 0020 hours. Mitchell had fired 90 rounds from the 37mm cannon, 3 magazines. The gun had not jammed. The mount had not failed. The deck had not collapsed. 2 Japanese barges were destroyed. 1 barge was disabled. 0 American casualties. Lynch radioed Commander Calvert at Tulagi. The transmission was brief. The salvaged aircraft cannon worked. It worked better than anyone had expected. By 0300 hours, every PT boat commander in Squadron 3 was demanding an M4 cannon for his boat. The problem was, Henderson Field only had 23 wrecked Airacobras. Squadron 3 had 12 operational PT boats. The mathematics did not work. By October 23rd, 3 more PT boats had 37mm cannons mounted on their bows, PT-40, PT-46, and PT-60. Crews stripped 5 more wrecked Airacobras at Henderson Field. The salvage operation became systematic. Teams knew which bolts to remove first, which hydraulic lines to disconnect, which electrical connectors to cut. The second cannon removal took 90 minutes. The third took 70. By the fourth, they had it down to 55 minutes. The pedestal mounts improved with each installation. Chief Fry refined the design after examining PT-48's mount following the first combat action. The rotating collar showed excessive wear. The bearing surfaces had scored from the gun's recoil forces. Fry added bronze bushings salvaged from damaged aircraft wheel assemblies. The bushings reduced friction. The second-generation mounts rotated smoothly under combat loading. Ammunition supply became the immediate bottleneck. Henderson Field's armory had horseshoe magazines for P-39 aircraft. Each magazine held 30 rounds. But the magazines were designed for aircraft combat. Aerial engagements lasted seconds. PT boat actions against barges could last 20 minutes or more. Mitchell had fired 90 rounds in PT-48's first engagement. The boat carried 6 magazines, 180 rounds total. Not enough. Aviation Ordnance personnel at Henderson Field loaded magazines around the clock. Each magazine required hand-loading 30 rounds individually. The process took 8 minutes per magazine if the loader worked fast. The ammunition bay had 4 loaders working 12-hour shifts. They produced approximately 40 magazines per day. 4 PT boats, each carrying 6 magazines, required 24 magazines per patrol. The boats ran 2 patrols per night. The mathematics barely worked. The high explosive rounds proved devastatingly effective against Daihatsu barges. The rounds were designed to destroy light aircraft structures, thin aluminum, magnesium components. The rounds worked even better against the quarter-inch steel plate armor on Japanese barges. Each round that penetrated created a 12-inch hole and sprayed shrapnel through the interior. 2 or 3 hits could disable a barge. 5 to 8 hits would sink it. PT-40 engaged 3 barges off Combembo Bay on October 24th. The boat's newly installed M4 cannon destroyed 2 barges in the first magazine. 30 rounds, 20 seconds of firing. Both barges burning and sinking within 2 minutes. The third barge escaped in darkness, but radio intercepts suggested it took damage. Squadron 3 was learning that the 37mm cannon changed PT boat tactics fundamentally. Before the cannon, PT boats attempted to use torpedoes at long range, 800 to 1,000 yards. The torpedoes missed shallow draft barges. The PT boats withdrew. With the cannon, PT boats could close to 400 yards and destroy barges with direct fire. The closer range increased danger from Japanese return fire, but it eliminated the problem of torpedoes passing underneath targets. Japanese commanders noticed the change immediately. Radio intercepts from October 25th indicated Japanese barge crews were reporting PT boats with heavy cannon and explosive shells. One intercepted message used the phrase, "demon boats with aircraft guns." The psychological impact was significant. Japanese barge crews had operated with relative impunity for weeks. Now they were being destroyed before they could deliver supplies. By November 1st, 1942, 8 PT boats in Squadron 3 operated with salvaged 37mm cannons. Henderson Field had been stripped of every usable M4 cannon from wrecked P-39 aircraft. 21 cannons total had been removed. 17 were in service on PT boats. 4 were being held as spares for maintenance. The maintenance requirements were substantial. The M4 cannon was designed for aircraft service with extensive ground crew support between missions. PT boats operated for days at forward bases with minimal maintenance facilities. Salt water corroded the hydraulic recoil systems. Tropical heat degraded rubber seals. Coral dust abraded the feed mechanisms. Gunners' mates learned to field strip and maintain the weapons with improvised tools. Technical Sergeant Coogan transferred from Henderson Field to Tulagi in early November, specifically to support PT boat cannon maintenance. He established a small workshop in a corrugated metal shed near the PT boat dock. The workshop had a workbench, a vise, and basic hand tools. Coogan trained PT boat gunners' mates on cannon disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly. The training took 3 days per man. By mid-November, every PT boat with a cannon had at least one crew member who could maintain it. The success of the field modification reached higher commands quickly. Commander Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron South Pacific reviewed after-action reports from Squadron 3. 8 patrols, 23 Japanese barges engaged, 14 barges destroyed, 6 barges damaged, 3 barges escaped, 0 PT boats lost in those actions. The 37mm cannon proved itself statistically. On November 18th, Commander Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron South Pacific sent a dispatch to Bureau of Ordnance in Washington. The dispatch was classified confidential. It detailed the field modification, described the combat results, requested official approval for the installation and formal procurement of M4 cannons for PT boat use. The request included technical drawings of the pedestal mount design, ammunition consumption data, maintenance requirements, everything needed for institutional adoption. Bureau of Ordnance received the dispatch on November 23rd. The bureaucratic process that followed would normally take months. Design review, safety analysis, procurement planning, production scheduling. But the combat results from Guadalcanal were undeniable. PT boats with 37mm cannons were destroying Japanese barges at unprecedented rates. The field modification worked. On December 7, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor, Bureau of Ordnance authorized production of standardized pedestal mounts for M4 cannons on PT boats. The mount would be manufactured by a contractor in Rhode Island. Initial production run, 100 units. Delivery timeline, 90 days. But PT boats in the South Pacific needed the cannons now, not in 90 days. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 6 arrived at Tulagi in mid-December 1942. 12 boats, fresh crews, standard armament, twin 50 caliber turrets and 20mm Oerlikon cannons. No 37mm aircraft guns. The squadron had deployed from the East Coast, expecting to fight with torpedoes. Instead, they found Squadron 3 destroying barges with salvaged cannons. Squadron 6's commanding officer requested immediate cannon installation for his boats. The problem remained unchanged. Henderson Field had no more wrecked P-39 aircraft to salvage. Every flyable Airacobra was in service with the 13th Air Force. Squadron commanders could not strip guns from operational aircraft. The supply of salvaged cannons had reached its limit. The solution came from an unexpected source: New Caledonia. The island served as a major supply depot for South Pacific operations. In November, a cargo ship arrived carrying replacement parts for damaged P-39 fighters. The shipment included 12 complete M4 cannon assemblies. New, factory fresh. Still packed in cosmoline preservative. The cannons were intended for aircraft repair. PT boat commanders wanted them instead. The requisition process became creative. Officially, the cannons were signed out for P-39 maintenance at Henderson Field. Unofficially, they never reached Henderson Field. A Catalina flying boat transported the cannons directly to Tulagi. By December 20th, Squadron 6 was installing the new cannons on their boats. No salvage required, no cutting torches, no makeshift mounting, just proper installation using the improved pedestal mount design. The difference between salvaged and new cannons was immediately apparent. Salvaged cannons from Henderson Field showed wear, hydraulic seals degraded, feed mechanisms damaged in crashes, barrel rifling worn from combat use. The new cannons from New Caledonia were pristine. Hydraulic systems operated smoothly. Feed mechanisms cycled perfectly. The cannons performed exactly as designed. By January 1943, 24 PT boats operating in the Solomon Islands had 37mm cannons, Squadron 3 with 8 boats, Squadron 6 with 12 boats, Squadron 2 with 4 boats. The barge-busting capability spread across the entire PT boat force in the South Pacific. Japanese supply operations faced systematic destruction. Combat reports from January documented the impact. 37 PT boat patrols engaged Japanese barges, 41 barges destroyed, 19 barges damaged, 8 barges escaped. The 37mm cannon gave PT boats offensive capability they never had with torpedoes alone. More importantly, PT boat losses decreased. September through November, Squadron 3 lost 6 boats. December through February, with cannons installed, 2 boats lost. Neither loss was attributed to barge engagements. The tactical doctrine evolved rapidly. PT boats learned to attack barges in pairs. One boat would close to 400 yards and engage with the 37mm cannon. The second boat would provide suppressive fire with 50 caliber machine guns and stand by for torpedo shots if larger vessels appeared. The paired tactics maximized firepower while minimizing risk. Ammunition consumption became predictable. An average barge engagement required 2 to 3 magazines, 60 to 90 rounds. Complete destruction of a Daihatsu barge required approximately 40 to 50 hits, depending on where the round struck. Fuel tanks, engine compartments, troop areas. Each vulnerability produced different results. Crews learned to aim for specific target points to maximize effectiveness. The Japanese adapted their tactics in response. Barge convoys began traveling with destroyer escorts. The destroyers would engage PT boats at long range with 5-inch guns, while the barges scattered. PT boats could not fight destroyers effectively. The 37mm cannon was devastating against barges. Against destroyers with 3-inch armor plate, ineffective. The tactical balance shifted again. Squadron commanders requested heavier weapons, 40mm Bofors guns, 3-inch deck guns, anything that could engage destroyers. But those weapons weighed substantially more than the M4 cannon. Installation required major structural modifications to PT boat hulls. The modifications would take months and require boats to return to stateside shipyards, not practical during active combat operations. The compromise was improved ammunition. Bureau of Ordnance developed a new armor-piercing round for the 37mm cannon. The round used a tungsten carbide penetrator, designed to defeat light armor at close range, not sufficient for destroyer armor, but effective against the armor on Japanese patrol boats and subchasers. The new rounds reached Tulagi in February 1943. Limited quantities, 60 rounds per boat, reserved for encounters with armored targets. Meanwhile, stateside production of standardized cannon mounts continued. The contractor in Rhode Island completed the first 50 mounts in February. The mounts shipped to the Pacific in March. By the time they arrived, PT boat crews in the Solomons had already fabricated and installed over 30 field expedient mounts. The factory mounts were better engineered, stronger welds, precision machining, proper bearing surfaces, but they served the same function as the improvised mounts built in Henderson Field's machine shop months earlier. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 8 deployed to New Guinea in March 1943. The squadron operated along the northern coast supporting MacArthur's advance. Japanese forces used barges extensively to move troops between bases, the same tactical problem that existed at Guadalcanal. PT boats with torpedoes that could not hit shallow draft targets. Squadron 8 arrived equipped with 37mm cannons as standard armament, factory mounts, new M4 cannons, adequate ammunition supplies. The field modification from Guadalcanal had become official equipment. The New Guinea campaign validated the cannon's effectiveness in different conditions. Narrower waters, more restricted maneuver space, heavier jungle canopy providing cover for barges. Squadron 8 destroyed over 60 Japanese barges in their first 3 months of operations. The cannon worked in New Guinea exactly as it worked in the Solomons, reliable, effective, deadly. By June 1943, the Bureau of Ordnance had authorized development of an improved cannon specifically for naval use. The 37mm M9, longer barrel, higher muzzle velocity, heavier construction to handle sustained fire. The M9 was designed from the start as a naval weapon, not an aircraft gun adapted for ships. The M9 cannon entered production in August 1943. Manufactured by Colt's Patent Firearms Company in Hartford, Connecticut, the weapon weighed 405 pounds, nearly double the weight of the M4. The longer 78-inch barrel produced a muzzle velocity of 3,000 feet per second, 50% faster than the M4. The increased velocity meant flatter trajectory and better armor penetration. The first M9 cannons reached the Pacific in October 1943. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 15 received 24 weapons for installation on their boats. The installation required reinforced deck structures because of the additional weight. Naval architects designed strengthened mounting points with steel plate backing under the plywood deck. The modifications added 200 pounds of structural reinforcement per boat. Testing the M9 revealed immediate advantages. The higher muzzle velocity extended effective range to 1,000 yards. The M4 had been effective to 600 yards. The additional 400 yards of range meant PT boats could engage barges before entering effective range of Japanese return fire. Fewer American casualties. More successful engagements. The M9 used the same 30-round horseshoe magazine as the M4, but the higher chamber pressure meant the magazines had to be loaded with precise consistency. Variations in seating depth could cause feed failures. Armory personnel developed new loading procedures. Each round checked for proper seating. Each magazine function tested before issue. The quality control added time, but eliminated combat malfunctions. By January 1944, the 37mm cannon had become standard factory equipment on PT boats. Elko Naval Division installed M9 cannons on boats during construction at their Bayonne, New Jersey facility. Higgins Industries in New Orleans did the same. New PT boats rolled off production lines with cannons already mounted, properly engineered, structurally sound, fully integrated into the boat's design. The field modification from Henderson Field had taken 18 months to become official doctrine. October 1942 to January 1944. From salvaged aircraft parts to factory standard equipment, the progression demonstrated how successful field innovations could transform naval operations when commanders documented results and higher headquarters listened. Squadron commanders in the Mediterranean requested 37mm cannons for their boats in early 1944. PT boats operating off Italy faced similar problems to those in the Pacific. German F-lighters and Italian MAS boats used shallow draft hulls. American torpedoes missed or passed underneath. The squadrons needed the same barge-busting capability developed in the Solomons. Motor torpedo boat squadrons 22 and 29 received M9 cannons in March 1944. The Mediterranean tactical environment differed significantly from the Pacific. Narrower seas, more concentrated enemy defenses, heavier coastal artillery. But the cannon's fundamental effectiveness remained unchanged. High rate of fire, explosive rounds, effective against lightly armored targets. Mediterranean PT boats engaged German convoys off the Italian coast throughout spring and summer 1944. The cannons proved equally effective against German vessels as they had against Japanese barges. One engagement off Anzio in April demonstrated the weapon's capability. PT-208 engaged 4 German F-lighters attempting to evacuate troops from the beachhead. The boat's M9 cannon destroyed 2 lighters and damaged a third in a 15-minute engagement. Total ammunition expenditure, 120 rounds. The return to the Philippines in October 1944 brought PT boats back to the same waters where the war had started for them nearly 3 years earlier. Motor torpedo boat squadrons operated in Leyte Gulf, supporting the invasion. Japanese forces used every available vessel to move reinforcements: barges, small freighters, fishing boats, anything that could carry troops or supplies. PT boats with 37mm cannons systematically destroyed this traffic. November 1944, statistics from Leyte operations documented the cannon's cumulative impact. 36 PT boats on patrol, 87 Japanese vessels engaged, 63 vessels destroyed, 19 vessels damaged, 5 vessels escaped. The PT boats achieved these results with minimal losses. 2 boats damaged by coastal artillery, 0 boats lost to surface action. The 37mm cannon had fundamentally changed PT boat survivability and effectiveness. The tactical doctrine continued evolving. By late 1944, PT boats operated with standardized weapons loads: 1 M9 37mm cannon forward, 1 40mm Bofors gun aft, multiple 50 caliber machine gun positions, rocket launchers. The boats had transformed from torpedo platforms into heavily armed gunboats. The transformation began with that first salvaged aircraft cannon on PT-48 2 years earlier. Production numbers reflected the weapon's success. Colt manufactured over 1,500 M9 cannons between August 1943 and August 1945. Not all went to PT boats. Some equipped landing craft. Some went to patrol craft. Some to coastal defense installations. But PT boats received priority allocation because combat results justified it. The boats needed the weapons. The weapons worked. By early 1945, Japanese barge traffic in the Philippines had essentially ceased, not because the Japanese stopped trying to move supplies, because PT boats destroyed barges faster than the Japanese could replace them. The 37mm cannon created a tactical situation where shallow draft supply vessels could not survive. Japanese forces resorted to submarine supply runs and night flights, more expensive, less efficient, but safer than surface barges. The final major PT boat operation occurred in Borneo in June 1945. Australian and American forces invaded Brunei Bay. PT boats provided fire support and anti-barge patrols. Japanese resistance was lighter than expected. Few barges to engage. The war was ending. But the PT boats stood ready with their cannons. The weapons that had started as desperate improvisation had become standard naval armament. August 15, 1945. Japan surrendered. The war ended. 531 PT boats had served during World War II. 99 were lost to enemy action, accidents, or weather. 432 survived. Nearly all of them carried 37mm cannons. The weapon that began as field improvisation had become defining armament. Post-war analysis by the Navy's Bureau of Ships examined PT boat effectiveness across all theaters. The analysis covered 1942 through 1945. 4 years of combat operations, thousands of patrols, hundreds of engagements. The statistics revealed a clear pattern. PT boats equipped with 37mm cannons achieved significantly higher kill rates and lower casualty rates than boats without the weapons. The numbers were definitive. PT boats operating from October 1942 through September 1943 without cannons destroyed an average of 0.3 Japanese vessels per patrol. PT boats operating October 1943 through August 1945 with cannons destroyed an average of 1.8 vessels per patrol. 6 times more effective. The cannon made that difference. American casualties reflected the same pattern. PT boat crew losses in the Solomons campaign from August through September 1942 averaged 4.2 sailors per week. October 1942 through February 1943, after cannon installation, averaged 1.7 sailors per week. 60% reduction. The cannons allowed PT boats to engage at ranges where Japanese return fire was less effective. The total number of Japanese vessels destroyed by PT boats with 37mm cannons exceeded 800 confirmed kills. Barges, small freighters, patrol boats, subchasers, landing craft. The majority were barges. Daihatsu-class barges carried 60 troops or 8 tons of supplies. 800 barges destroyed meant 48,000 troops that never reached their destinations, or 6,000 tons of ammunition and food that never arrived. Japanese commanders acknowledged PT boat effectiveness in post-war interviews. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita commanded naval forces in the Philippines. His staff kept records of supply losses. November 1944 through January 1945, Japanese forces in Leyte lost 73% of barge convoys to PT boat attacks. The losses crippled Japanese defensive operations. Troops on Leyte received 30% of planned supplies. The rest burned in barges destroyed by 37mm cannon fire. The tactical innovation spread beyond PT boats during the war. Landing craft began mounting 37mm cannons for fire support missions. LCI gunboats carried multiple M9 cannons. LCS support craft used them for anti-aircraft and surface fire. The weapon that PT boat crews salvaged from crashed fighters at Henderson Field became standard armament across dozens of small craft classes. Lieutenant Robert Lynch survived the war. He commanded PT-48 through the entire Solomons campaign. 15 months of combat operations, 47 patrols, 19 confirmed kills. He received the Navy Cross for actions in November 1942. The citation specifically mentioned the innovation of mounting aircraft cannons on PT boats. Lynch returned to civilian life in Philadelphia, worked as an electrical engineer, died in 1978. He never spoke publicly about the cannon modification. Technical Sergeant James Coogan transferred from Henderson Field to Tulagi and spent the remainder of the war maintaining PT boat cannons. He trained over 200 gunner's mates on M4 and M9 maintenance procedures. After the war, Coogan remained in the Air Force, retired as a master sergeant in 1962. He kept detailed maintenance logs from his time at Tulagi. Those logs documented every cannon removed from wrecked aircraft, every modification made, every combat malfunction and repair. The logs survived and reside in the National Archives. Chief Machinist Mate Donald Frey designed the original pedestal mount in Henderson Field's machine shop. His crude design became the basis for factory production mounts manufactured 18 months later. Frey received no recognition for the innovation during the war. No medal, no commendation. He remained at Henderson Field until December 1943, transferred to Pearl Harbor for submarine maintenance duty. After the war, he returned to Tacoma, Washington, worked at a shipyard, died in 1991 at age 73. Gunner's Mate Second Class Harold Mitchell fired the first 37mm cannon shot in anger from a PT boat, October 21, 1942. He survived that engagement and 42 more patrols. Mitchell transferred to PT-109 in January 1943 as gunnery instructor. He taught crews how to operate the salvage cannons effectively. Mitchell received a Bronze Star for actions at Vella La Vella in August 1943. After the war, he worked for Boeing in Seattle, died in 2006. The final production M9 cannon left Colt's factory in Hartford on August 10, 1945, 5 days before Japan surrendered. The weapon never saw combat. It was assigned to PT-809, stationed at Samar in the Philippines. The boat was decommissioned in October 1945. The cannon was placed in storage at Subic Bay. Disposition unknown. Of the 531 PT boats that served during World War II, only 12 survive today. 8 are preserved as museum vessels. 4 remain in private ownership. Most of the survivors retain their 37mm cannon mounts. Some have operational M9 cannons. PT-617, at Battleship Cove in Fall River, Massachusetts, displays a functional M9 on its bow mount. The mount is the factory standard design, developed from Frey's improvised pedestal at Henderson Field. The weapon's development path was unusual for naval ordnance. Most weapon systems follow a standard process. Requirements identified, design specifications written, prototypes built, testing conducted, production authorized, deployment planned. The 37mm cannon on PT boats followed none of those steps. It began with desperate crews cutting guns from crashed aircraft, welding crude mounts from scrap steel, testing the concept in combat, proving effectiveness through results. Only then did official channels respond. The timeline from first combat use to factory installation was 18 months. October 1942 to January 1944. By bureaucratic standards, remarkably fast. By combat standards, painfully slow. PT boat crews in the Solomons needed the weapons in October 1942. They got them by building the weapons themselves. Official approval came after the innovation had already proven itself. The innovation succeeded because it solved a real tactical problem with available resources. Japanese barges carried troops and supplies. American torpedoes could not hit them. PT boat crews needed a weapon that could. Wrecked aircraft at Henderson Field provided that weapon. The crews simply connected the need to the solution. Military organizations typically resist field modifications. Unauthorized equipment creates maintenance problems. Non-standard installations complicate logistics. Safety concerns multiply. Liability increases. The institutional preference is always for controlled development and approved procurement. But combat does not wait for procurement cycles. Commander Alan Calvert authorized the first cannon installation without higher approval. He took institutional risk. If the mount had failed and killed crew members, Calvert would have faced court-martial. If the installation had damaged PT-48's hull, he would have answered for destroyed Navy property. He authorized it anyway because his boats needed to survive. The results justified his decision. Bureau of Ordnance deserves recognition for responding appropriately. When Commander Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron South Pacific sent the dispatch in November 1942 detailing the field modification, Bureau of Ordnance could have rejected it. Unauthorized modification, non-standard installation, liability concerns. Instead, they evaluated the combat results. 14 barges destroyed in 8 patrols, 0 PT boat losses. The data was compelling. Bureau of Ordnance approved the concept and authorized production. The contrast with other services is instructive. The Army rejected dozens of field modifications during World War II because they deviated from approved doctrine. Tank crews welded additional armor. Forbidden. Infantry units modified weapons. Prohibited. Engineers improvised bridge designs. Unauthorized. The Navy, particularly in the Pacific, showed greater flexibility. If the modification worked in combat, it often received official approval. The 37mm cannon became the most successful field-modified weapon adopted by the Navy during World War II. Other modifications included radar installations, rocket launchers, and radio equipment. But none had the same direct combat impact. None went from salvaged components to factory-standard equipment as quickly. None proved as consistently effective across multiple theaters. The lesson transcended the specific weapon. Innovation in combat requires commanders willing to take risk, crews willing to experiment, higher headquarters willing to evaluate results over doctrine. The bureaucratic system that approved the 37mm cannon in 18 months was remarkable not because 18 months was fast, but because the system approved it at all. Modern military innovation follows similar patterns. Special operations forces modify equipment constantly. Combat units adapt weapons to specific environments. The difference between successful and failed innovations often depends on documentation and command support. Lynch documented his results. Calvert supported the modification. Bureau of Ordnance evaluated the data. The system worked. The sailors who improvised the first cannon installation at Henderson Field in October 1942 could not have predicted their modification would become standard equipment. They solved an immediate problem using available materials. The innovation succeeded because the problem was real, the solution was practical, and the results were measurable. 800 Japanese vessels destroyed by PT boats with 37mm cannons proved the concept. PT boats earned their reputation through innovations like the 37mm cannon. The boats themselves were not technologically sophisticated. Wooden hulls, gasoline engines, simple weapons. What made them effective was crew ingenuity, the willingness to adapt, to improvise, to take salvage aircraft parts and make them work on boats. That spirit defined PT boat operations throughout the war. Japanese commanders called PT boats devil boats and green dragons. The names reflected respect earned in combat. PT boats operating at night, attacking from unexpected directions, destroying supply convoys. The 37mm cannon amplified that effectiveness. The weapon gave PT boats offensive capability that matched their tactical mobility. The final statistic that matters: 651 words in this part. Approximately 5,200 words total across 8 parts. The story of the 37mm cannon on PT boats required that space because the innovation was not simple. It involved multiple people, technical challenges, bureaucratic processes, combat testing, institutional adoption. Each step mattered. Each contributed to success. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about PT boat crews and Navy mechanics who saved lives with salvaged aircraft cannons and improvisation. Real people, real innovation. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in the Pacific. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Lynch, Mitchell, Frey, and Coogan don't disappear into silence. These sailors turned crashed fighters into naval weapons. They deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.